All right, here we go.
Dr. Peterson.
Yes,
Hi, this is Fladina. This information here, is it in our modular that we can print?
it will be. I just realized that these last few lectures that we're going to do are not. So thank you for bringing that up. It kind of puts a reminder in my head to make sure these get posted.
Oh,
So yes,
okay.
Yes,
thank you,
sir.
thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So the first thing I want to state is, what do we mean by relapse prevention as we just get into this very specific topic? And when we look at treatment for substance abuse and addiction, there's a process. The process begins with detox. And then there's usually a medical team that is part of it. And there's also sometimes in best practices, an individual therapy part of it. Um, but then after there's the detox, there's the initial psychosocial treatment information about their addiction, about the substance they use, and all those kinds of things. We go into a relapse prevention type group. And the goal is to help individuals, one, understand what relapse is, which we'll get into, and two, coping skills to try and help prevent relapse from happening in the first place. So just to kind of give a little bit of history, these are some of the contemporary approaches that have been used, both for the relapse, but just the beginning interventions. Okay. We probably all know about the 12-step fellowship program, which we'll get into here in a few minutes. There's some critiques that we do need to make about this one. And a lot of times this is a definitely a recommended course of treatment because of the support system and everything that it can provide. But it does have its own limitations that we need to take into account, which we'll get to here in just a minute. What is known as the traditional Minnesota model of inpatient treatment. So this is that following the line that I just mentioned. So we start with detox, which is getting the substance out of the body physically. Usually this is provided with medical supervision, especially for those who are addicted to alcohol. It is very important for detox, for people who are detoxing from alcohol, to be medically supervised, because they're the ones that are at most risk for seizures. And they're the ones at most risk for example, during a seizure, to choke on uh, products in their throat and their mouth and pass away. So some of the other ones to detox are not as risky, but alcohol is definitely one of those where medical supervision is a necessity. And then a lot of times there's individual sessions that then get in combination with AA and groups. The important part, and I'm hoping this is kind of review for many of you, is that it uses the disease model of care, saying that just like diabetes, just like mental illness, just like cancer, substance abuse or addiction is a medical problem that the individual is encountering. Okay. And so it very much states that there's no, how you would say, cure for addiction, but you can treat the addiction. Just like right now, there's no cure for diabetes, there's no cure for cancer, but you can treat diabetes and you can treat cancer. Okay, and that's the basics of the medical model. Isabel, you have your hand up.
Is that why they say like once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic, or once you're an addict, you're always an addict? Not that they are actively, but they refer themselves to that?
Yes, that's exactly, yes, that is someone who is very much into the medical model
Hi,
of
welcome back. Let me know if you need my help, okay?
um, and it is the idea that just like diabetes and the like, that it's not something that again can be cured. It's something that is more like diabetes and will be there um, uh, just just like the disease, the physical diseases that are kind of like it. Yes, absolutely. Um, and I do have to say there is some support for this idea. Um, uh, just like when we're dealing with physical disorders and you're dealing with diabetes, if you don't change your lifestyle, you're not going to change the course of that disease. And I like using diabetes because it's a really close example of addiction. If you stay within your habits, if you stay within the way you are living, you will not leave that disease, and it will eventually take you over and usually result in an early life expectancy. So yes, Isabel, that's a great example of when people say addiction is lifelong. Okay. There is something called therapeutic communities for substance abuse. These usually are 24-hour residential settings, norms, responsibilities, and what we call encounter groups. I actually worked in one of these kind of part-time when I was working for the prison system. It was usually set up for individuals who were in prison really for that really first time, but they had an intense substance abuse problem, and they lived in open dorms. And part of the process, especially when you're dealing with a criminal element, is getting oneself to accept responsibility, but also calling other people on their behaviors. So, for example, one of the processes they'd use is each week they would do encounter groups where one of the facilitators, you went and wrote, I saw Jill doing triggering behaviors or substance abuse behaviors or this or that, and they would put it in this confidential box. And then the facilitator each week, usually a couple times a week, would get everyone together and they would read out loud the offense of or the issue that person was having by saying, one of your group members noticed this behavior in you. And then they would then encounter the person to help them understand what was going on with that situation. So the issue with therapeutic communities is they're very, very effective. But for example, when the person leaves that therapeutic community, they don't have that structure of support anymore. They don't have those individuals who are caring for them and calling them on their bull, basically, and there to support them. And so the issue with therapeutic communities is that they often fail once the individual is released. I don't want to say fail, but if that aftercare, I would say, is not there and in place, it can be quite disastrous. Okay. Pharmacological therapy, of course, is the use of things like methadone, naltrexone, and these medications have two types of effects. One effect is to make the person nauseous to the substance. So there's some alcohol pharmacological that if you take the medication and then you drink, you become nauseous, and it has what you call the Garcia effect, where the person is punished basically for ingesting that medication, and the medication gets associated with that nausea. Okay. Other medications like methadone work on the same biological mechanism that the drug does without providing the high. Okay. And that's the same thing with naproxen when we deal with substance abuse. Alcohol mainly reacts to the opioid system. And so what the naltrexone does is it kind of makes it so the alcohol molecules cannot penetrate the opioid receptors. So while you get the same coordination issues, you get the same slowing of motor processes, motor skills, you don't get the quote unquote high or the numbingness that usually alcoholics look for. Okay. So without that numbing, basically you're getting the physical discoordination and all kind of the negative effects of drinking. And so those are kind of the goals of the pharmacological therapies is either to substitute without the high, or to make nausea occur when that substance is ingested, or to block the positive aspects of that substance. Okay. On the pharmacological end, they can be very, very effective in the beginning aspects of treatment, but usually they're not a long-term solution. Usually you have to have some type of other psychological, behavioral, and social intervention as well. Like I said, they work really good up front, but not always if it's the only course of action that one takes. Okay. And then there's the traditional, when you think of mental health type treatments, right? You have psychological therapies. This can be like group or couple and individual therapies. With groups, you're really looking at the psychological reasons, the trauma reasons that people are using. With a couples treatment, you might have two married couples, two married individuals. I shouldn't say two married couples, that would be weird. Two married individuals, that doesn't even sound right. Two people who are in a relationship that are enabling each other. Okay. And so you might want to do some type of therapy to understand that enabling behavior. And then, of course, individual therapy. And usually this is really good with individuals where the substance abuse triggered the trauma triggered the substance abuse. Okay. So both in the group and the individual level, again, I can go back to my prison experience where we went in and we did a survey of the female inmates, and it was something like 85 to 90% of the inmates had some type of severe trauma in their childhood, usually dealing with stuff like sexual rape, severe physical abuse, something to that nature. And with about 90% of those individuals, is that trauma preceded their substance use and their criminal behavior, meaning it happened before the person engaged in substance use and criminal behavior. Okay. I think I said that the same way twice, but I'm hoping you get the point. And so with this group, and this is what I mean by psychological therapies, instead of putting them in the traditional drug and alcohol treatment process and groups, we put them in a group that focus solely on post-traumatic stress disorder and symptoms. Okay. And we wanted to see what that did. Okay. So with the idea that it was that trauma that led to substance use and criminal behavior, and that if we corrected or helped the individual with that trauma, that would slow substance use and criminal behavior. That was kind of the thought process we had. The measure was, of course, recidivism rate. If anyone knows, in the United States, the recidivism rate is around 60%, which is defined as the probability that someone will come back to prison after their first time in prison. Okay, and in the United States, it's about 60%. Well, using that as a measure, when we focused on the trauma symptoms, that recidivism rate went down to, I used to know the number exactly, but it was between about 15 to 20%. So almost more than half, like we're talking a third of what the traditional level would be by focusing on the trauma. And that's what we mean by focusing on the psychological therapies, in addition to focusing on the substance use, okay? Behavioral therapies. So this is working on the person's behavior. So this can be things like aversion therapy, cue exposure, skills training. And really what this looks like is it's kind of combined. I'm going to go ahead and do cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is really the relapse prevention part. This is about coping skill training, cognitive therapy, and lifestyle modification. And what we do in this process is we get people to identify their trigger. And once they can identify their trigger, which leads to cravings, then we help the person put in behavioral and cognitive interventions. So, one of the most basic behavioral strategies is if a person is driving home and they trigger when they're in a certain part, like maybe there's a bar or something, we do what's called an avoidance behavior. So we have them drive a different route home so that they're not triggering, they're just basically avoiding that trigger, okay? That's a very basic example. And then we also look on the cognitive level. So we get them to trigger, right? They usually bring around a notebook today. I think today's now they have apps for phones, and you come across something and you're triggering and your cravings start. And what we ask them to do is instantly right there and then stop and write down their instant thoughts that are coming to their mind. Okay, everything. Now, usually you have them do this repetitively for about 100 times. You usually throw away the first week or two of them because they're usually putting stuff that they think the therapist wants to hear or the group wants to hear or what they want to hear. And you start in about end of week 2, week 3, and start when they're starting to just get comfortable and whatnot with really writing down their own thoughts. And then you go through things like error correction. How can you rethink these thoughts? Challenging thoughts, like we've went through about challenging your clients and those types of things. And then, of course, lifestyle modification. And again, it's an important aspect of treatment for alcohol and substance abuse. Again, I'm going to bring up the prison example. In prisons, you have the option. Usually, you are put back into the community for which you came from, okay, where you committed your crimes and those kinds of things. But then there's individuals that do things like interstate compacts, where they go to another state with family and they serve out their parole in that, or probation in that totally different environment, in that totally different community, okay? And again, when we look at recidivism rate and relapse rate, when individuals go back to the community they came from, their relapse and their recidivism rate are higher than 60%. But when you go somewhere else and you reestablish yourself in a totally different community where you don't have your old friends, your old influences, your old triggers, the recidivism goes less than 40%. Okay, which is significant if you think about that. Okay, and so we look at lifestyle modifications. Who are you hanging out with? Who is bad for you and who is good for you? Who enables you? And we work on those different lifestyles that the individual is getting into. Okay. And so if we were to kind of summarize this into the different models of treatment, and we'll kind of end with this one tonight because I promised that I was going to cut tonight short, and it's just a good introduction to these different treatment models. And again, if you do the substance abuse treatment, you'll go into these in great detail. So I just want to provide an overview. But when we're using Brinkman's model, okay, we can put treatment modalities on two continuums. Continuum one is the person responsible for the development of their addictive behavior. Okay, so are they the cause of the behavior? Are they the primary source? Okay. The second continuum we can look at is the person responsible for changing that addictive behavior? Okay, are they the ones that need to take responsibility for it? Okay. So if we have a yes on this continuum and a yes on this is what we call a moral model of drug abuse. Probably the best example of this is the war on drugs and just say no, because it's you making that choice to say yes. Okay. In this model, relapse is that crime or lack of willpower, that the person just does not have the moral fortitude to resist drugs and alcohol. And so they're morally responsible for correcting that behavior. Okay. Is the person responsible? And is the person, so yes. Is the person responsible for changing the addictive behavior? No. This is what we call a moral model. This is the basis of AA and the 12 not moral model, spiritual model. That really what is causing your addiction is you're falling from your spiritual self. Okay. And so relapse in itself in this model is a sin or loss of contact with your higher power. Okay. And I want to check real quick here. Okay. Yeah, we'll hit that next one and we'll get to that. The next one is the person is not responsible for the development of their addictive behavior, but are responsible for changing it. Okay. This is what's called a consumptory model or a cognitive behavioral. This is that last one we talked about, where relapse is really about a mistake, a misjudgment, a temporary setback, but it's not defining the individual. It's not because they're morally less or they're less, they've lost their God or their spiritual direction. It's about simply they made a mistake. And the goal is to provide coping skills and behavioral techniques that when that arises again, they won't make that same mistake or that same temporary setback. Okay. Now, is the person responsible? No. Is the person responsible for changing? No. This is the disease model. Okay. This is addiction is hereditary and it's physiological. Okay. And what relapse is in this model is just like when you think about cancer, when cancer goes into remission. Remission being that the disease is no longer growing, it's not developing anymore, and it's kind of, and a lot of times the cancer is shrinking. okay? But then when you come out of remission, the disease starts to progress again, okay? Using that same analogy, a relapse is a reactivation of a progressive disease, that you're now going through the disease process again, okay? And in this model, the person does not have control over it, and how do you take responsibility for it, okay? While, and again, in this, it means you take physiological control over your body, you take the medications, you do the lifestyle changes like you would with cancer or diabetes to try and hope that you can help your body keep that disease state in remission, but you yourself are not going to be the determinant of that. Okay. And just to say this again, these models are kind of mixed and matched with each other. You'll very seldom find someone going through the correction system who is not told they need to go to a relapse prevention cognitive behavioral, and they better show up to their AA meetings. So there's a mix and match of all of these different disease. If you think about the moral model, this is our kind of social judgment of addicts, right? And so all of these kind of have a way of kind of entering both our popular culture and our treatment models. All right, as promised, I am going to end with this because one of the things I do want to state is whatever treatment model, if you're going into this field, you need to make sure it is normed for your population, okay? And this is the reason why I say this. If you take the original version of the 12-step program, it is normed on middle-class white Christians. I'm going to say that again. If you take the 12-step book and you use it exactly as it states, it is meant for middle income white Christian males, which means its efficacy isn't high for women. It's not high for people who are in low income situations. It's not high efficacy for people of minority, of people of color. The pure 12-step program is not normed for women and minorities of color and people in low socioeconomic status. And that is why it fails as a standalone treatment for a lot of people. Now, I'm not going to say it doesn't work for certain people. It definitely does, whether they're minority or of color. It definitely does for a few people, but you're actually putting women and minority individuals at more of a higher risk of going back into relapse by the pure 12-step programs. So when you look at the 12-step programs, make sure that that program has been adapted to your population. So for example, I know that there are a few Native American communities who have taken the 12-step program and have made it applicable to their spiritual way of being, okay? And what I would say with this is any of these treatment groups, make sure that they have been adapted and normed to the group that you're working with, okay? All right, so I promised I wanted to give some time for people who did not complete the quiz. For those who came here later, I said I was going to keep today's lecture short because I noticed that a lot of individuals have not completed the quiz. So I want to provide more time